Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at adding some validation code to a bean, and we're going to use that in subsequent tutorials to validate our form, validate the information that the user enters. So I made a little change since the last tutorial, and what I've done is I've changed the user name in my user.java bean to a password, to an email, because the idea is that the user will log in to some sort of system using their email address and password, and I want to validate those, make sure the email address looks like an email address, and make sure the password is long enough at least. So another change I'm going to make here is I'm going to give this user bean a constructor just to make it easier to work with, really. So I'm going to right click here and go to source and generate constructor using fields, and just generate a constructor there. Now a bean has to have a default constructor, so I'll also give this a public user, a default constructor that takes no parameters, otherwise it wouldn't be a bean anymore and we couldn't use it as a JSP bean. Let's get rid of that because we don't need it. And I'm going to create here, let's create a new source file. Let's go to new class, and I'm just going to call this class test, and it's just going to be a little test program that I can use to test my bean. And let's put that in a package called test, which I could delete later if I didn't want to keep it. So I'll check that this runs okay. I'll put this out in there, hello, and just run this as a Java application. So there we go, so that works. And now let's create a new user bean in here. So I'll say user equals new user, and if I look at the constructor that I added, the one that takes parameters, first I can add an email address like john@caveofprogramming.com, and then a password which could be some kind of crazy stuff like that. And let's add the import there. So I want beans.user from my beans package. And now I'm going to go to user and I'm going to add a few things to it. So I'm going to add a private string message, and this is going to be a message that's returned if the bean can't be validated. So if the user's entered bad information, we're going to set that message to something that tells us why it can't be validated. Let's just add a get method to that message, because I'm going to set it directly in my bean, in the bean itself. And I'm also going to add here a public boolean validate. It's a validate method, and if everything validates okay, I'll return true. So at the moment I could use this like this. I could say if user.validate, then let's say sysout form, let's say bean validates okay, else I could say sysout and user.get message, and we can find out why it's not validated correctly. And maybe let's set the message by default to error validating information, but we should never actually display that. I just want to set it to something just in case there's like a bug in the code really and we forget to set it somewhere. So now let's fill in this validate method, and that's all I'm going to do in this tutorial. And firstly, let's check that the password's long enough. So I can say if password.length is less than 8, then I can say message equals password must be at least 8 characters, semicolon, and return false. Now if the length checks out okay, let's do some slightly more detailed validation, and I can say else if not password dot matches, and I'm using the matches method of string here, which allows you to supply a regular expression, and whatever regular expression you put in here, then this string must match all of it. So I just want to say here that there's a problem if the password consists only of space. So let's say if the password doesn't match, actually let's say if the password matches nothing but space, so nothing but space would look like, you could use \capital S, meaning not space, and then plus, meaning at least one space thing. So we'll say if the password matches a load of space, I need to escape the escape character, so to speak, as well. Then we'll say message equals, I think that's right, password cannot cannot contain space. In fact, I really want to say that even if the password's got a space in it, there's a problem, because I probably don't want space in the password. So I could say if the password matches, let's say the password could have a 0 or more alphanumeric characters, and then at least one space, and then 0 or more alphanumeric characters again. If it matches that, in other words, if there's a space in it somewhere surrounded by 0 or more alphanumeric characters, then there's a problem. It's got a space in it, and we don't want that. I probably could have done this simpler, actually, using a contains method or something, but I think that will do. And again, if that doesn't check out, then I say false. So if it matches this, then it's got space in it, and I'm returning false. And let's just check that that works. So I'll go here and I'll say let's add a space in the password, and let's run this, and it says bean validates okay. So I've got something slightly wrong there. Let's just go back to the user bean. So I'm saying that if there's a space in it somewhere, then I've got a problem. Oh yeah, that's not space. I want to say if there is a space in it somewhere. There we go. Let's run this. Oops, I don't want to run that. I want to run this one here, and I want to run it as a Java application. Password cannot contain space. So I think that's working. So I'm not going to dwell on this too much. That looks good to me, but I'm not completely sure, but I think it's okay. And let's check to see if we've got a really small password. It should complain that it's not big enough. So let's run that. Password must be at least 8 characters. So I think that's quite acceptable. Let's run that and see bean validates okay. Okay, and let's just write one for the email address as well. And of course, this isn't really web programming specific stuff, so if you feel you've got the idea by now, then feel free to skip the rest of this tutorial. But I'm going to also validate the email address. And actually, you can't be sure that the user's entered a valid email address without actually sending an email to that email address and getting them to click on a link in the email. But we'll at least check that it looks like an email address. So I'll say if not email.matches, and let's say if email equals null, then I want to return and say message equals no email address set, and return false, because I don't want null pointers potentially to occur in my validation code here, which they could do if I don't check this, possibly. So let's put a closing bracket in there, and let's copy that, because I want a really similar thing for the password. So let's say if password equals null, let's say no password set. Okay, now we can validate the email address with a pattern like this, and let's just put in the error code first. Message equals, the error message. Let's say invalid email address, and return false. And then finally, I want to say that the email address, it must contain at least one alphanumeric character. So plus W means alphanumeric character, which could be an underscore or a number, and plus means at least one of those, and more if possible. And then it's got to contain one of these at signs, and then we need some more alphanumeric stuff, and then we need a dot, which I'll escape because otherwise dot would match any character, and then finally some more alphanumeric characters. So let's just go to my test.java and see if this works. So that should validate, okay, and it does. But let's say, for example, if I miss that out, it should not validate. Invalid email address. Or if I didn't have this bit, that should not validate. Invalid email address. Or this bit. There we go. And of course, if I missed out like that at sign, then it should not validate. So that looks quite reasonable to me. And as I say, you can't. There's only so much you can do in validating an email address because it could be a fake one anyway. So that's it for this tutorial. And all I've really done is, as I say, I've added some validation code to my user bean, and we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how to actually wire that into your JSP in the next tutorial, and then we're going to go on to look at how you could also use that from a servlet if you wanted to. So join me again next time, and until next time, happy coding.